Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Glow Touch podcast series. Previously, we talked about program implementation and how a smooth onboarding process lays the foundation for a partnership between the outsourcing provider and the client. Today, we're going to look at what makes an operation run, whether the application is customer facing support, back office processing, or technology focused. Ultimately, it is people who will be making contact with your company's service department. They'll call with issues and questions, they may chat or email, and likewise, it will be people who will provide resolution and answers. So, how do you find and keep the best qualified people? To help us with that, we turn to Danan Smith, Director of Talent Acquisition at GlowTouch. Danan, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, Alex. Good to see you.
You too. So we have the paperwork done. The ink is dry. We're now moving on. Others are working on program implementation. You're tasked with successfully recruiting and hiring the necessary personnel. What's a reasonable overview of what that looks like?
Yeah. So, specifically we're the ones that are bringing the piece of the puzzle that's going to ultimately complete and hopefully satisfy the customer and the customer's customer. So finding that piece is a challenge. I think that if you ask anyone, either in this industry or outside, even in general, there is what we call in the talent acquisition area a war for talent. And finding the right people that fit within a culture and bring good pieces to that culture as well, that are um, fitting into the specific program or job that we have lined out is important. And it is, I'm using the word challenging again, but it is definitely the most difficult part of this job. The other piece of it, especially with the industry or the economy that we're dealing with now globally, is that candidates tend to move very quickly. Not to make it too much away from the human aspect of it, but they do have an expiration date on when they, move through. If you interview somebody, for instance, um, a month ago, they may or may not be available now. So if your processes aren't streamlined and making it very candidate focused in terms of a good experience for them, it's really the beginning of their involvement with the company. So you're the cheerleader for the company, you're the one that attracts the talent, you're the advocate for the company, you're the advocate for the candidate on the other side. And bringing all those pieces together in order for that to transition into a good employee experience is really the hardest part, but it's also the funnest part.
I want to follow up on a couple of things that you brought up, and one of them is experience. We talk a lot about the customer experience,
Mhm.
obviously, and how to make it seamless across various channels and platforms. On occasion, we talk about the agent experience once that person is in a seat and established. What does the recruit experience look like? I mean, if I'm first time coming to Glow Touch, I've got the skill set that you're looking for. What is a good experience going to look like from my viewpoint?
Yeah. It's going to differ from person to person, and it's also going to differ from the position to position. But um, what we try to do is make sure that we gather enough information to understand what it is that you would be a good fit for, um, but yet still and do that seamlessly so that you're not spending a lot of time on things. I'll give you an example. Um, do I want Alex as a candidate to spend a whole lot of time on filling out an application? If you've been around for as long as I have, you'll remember the day when you had to fill out an application from the day
Yes.
all the way through to signing. And nowadays, with technology the way that it is, and even more evolving past that, it's important that you make that very short and gather the information that you need. Do we need everything on the front end, or can we spread that information out or gathering out over a shorter period of time. So we want to shorten that experience for them, but yet still make them not feel rushed in a decision that they make to join us, and still make sure that they're, again, the right person for the position that we're looking for. And so what it looks like is, they go through the application piece. We feel like it's important for them to meet as many people as they can, to gather information for themselves and for us to gather that information, and yet still keep it as quick as possible. So we do short, really, exposures to the candidate, and then move that process through so that they get an answer as quickly as possible. So we might have, for particular roles, specifically agents, a very short timeline where they can apply one day, they get met the next day. In between there, they may do an assessment depending on what's the requirement of the client, and then a decision is made, and then we do the offer and background check and all of that, starting into onboarding. And really making those efficient is really the key to everything, and not making it feel like we've missed a human part there, and that we're still connected to that candidate.
Because these are people, after all.
They're people, and there's different theories on that in talent acquisition. There's theories about just completely automating and moving it straight through, and depending on, honestly, from a generational perspective and what they're used to doing, it's definitely moving to that where there's more automation. They're taking their assessments very quickly. They're doing a quick audio or those type tools that are out there. And then there's others that it's just going to take more time. And it really just depends on the candidate and what they're looking for in an experience. But again, we're trying to make that as comforting to them and still gathering the information, because a wrong hire is also not a good plan. You don't want to work through that process so quickly that you've hired somebody that isn't a good fit, doesn't have the skill set that you need. And so, you're balancing that. You're on a constant balance of how you're attracting the talent and how you're moving them through the process, for our internal clients, like our operations groups and stuff.
Assuming that you have a list of prospects who they tick all the boxes as far as the education, experience, skills, all those things are concerned, how do you go about determining fit? And I understand it. It's one of those things that, gosh, it's almost like I may not be able to define it, but I know it when I see it.
Mhm.
And you certainly, and I think we all have faced that challenge of you're in a new surrounding. It's up to you to assimilate to the rest of the group, not the other way around. But you're seeing people on a fairly limited basis. Uh, it's kind of quick. It's not quite speed dating, but
Mhm.
somewhere along those. But you're having to make a rapid assessment. How do you determine if an individual is probably going to be a good fit and one who maybe not this campaign, maybe something else?
It's interesting because, believe it or not, the answer is probably not what you were thinking. It's not starting with the candidate. It's
Hmm.
actually starting with your client and understanding what's a fit for them. And that
Okay.
involves your external clients and your internal clients. Because if you know that, so if you know, for instance, your client needs a specific skill sets and they understand that, in order to be successful for them, this is what it looks like. Your internal operations clients or whoever that might be, also has their idea of what's going to be successful in the more localized environment. Once you know that, when you should be able to seamlessly then have conversations that guide towards that. And a lot of it could be, if you have one particular external client that's very customer focused in terms of retail, or needs a certain approach to handling a problem, then when you're asking those, to ask questions that align to that. And so we align our process to our client requirements. Sometimes they're very similar, one client to another. Sometimes they're very different. We may have a completely different assessment of theirs, or it may take longer to do that. And that goes all the way through to even a background check. There's requirements that external clients have where they have to pass this, and so it takes longer. So you have to prepare for that. But I think back to, and maybe coming back to the original thought there of, you've got to understand what they want, what your clients want. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to make a match. You're immediately starting off behind. And while it may work through the recruiting process, you'll see that it doesn't retain them long term because they either don't feel like it was a fit. Oh, I didn't know this. And clients are like, they just didn't align. Maybe a great employee, but for them in that particular campaign or whatever it is, just needs to be adjusted. So,
Okay. Well, now you have them. Let's talk a little bit about retention, the perennial struggle. And it's hardly confined to this industry. I think it's probably for everybody. There's a massive labor pool. People loyalty is not what it was maybe 40 years ago, but that works. That cuts both ways. Now it's all we've almost made people into widgets, which I hate to say, but you take a skill set and you plug it into a particular need, and presumably it all works out. But once you get them in, what do you do to try to set the conditions for where they'll want to stay?
oh, um, I'll use two parts of this. One part is retaining them through the hiring process, because that's a big step. They don't know you yet, right? They don't know the client, they don't know your company yet. And so I think that all good retention starts with the good experience on the front end. Because if you've set that expectation and consistently communicated with them, which we have found over the years and even more current, that communication is the best way, whether or not it's something they want to hear or not. Yes, this is a good fit for you. We'd like to move forward. No, this isn't a good fit for you, but I'd like to keep you on my radar screen for other things. That and the honesty and the communication help build for later. Um, when you talk about retention later, and there's 1,000 different things you can do to retain. It's not, though, what I have found in my experience, just throwing money at it. It's not the salary increases. It's not the compensated. It's a big part. I will say that people work for a
Sure.
living. However, there are different things that will motivate people to stay and find loyalty and support and a community within their company. And you have to find out what that is. And that might vary from group to group. If you have a large accounting staff, their motivation to stay may be very, very different than your operations group, from your HR group, from your whatever it is. And so it's important that leaders, there's a fundamental, keep that communication line going, but it's important that leaders in each one of those groups find what motivates and retains those people and advocates in that direction, whatever resources they need in order to do it. And again, it may be very much monetarily driven in one area, but it may be not in another. You like to find that balance, and organizations have a hard time doing that. Not one size fits all. And so you have to be able to find it and execute on it. And again, there's pieces that people stay for different reasons. Some people like lots of feedback. Some people would rather just kind of head down, do their job, be happy with that. And you've got to
Right.
figure what that out, what that is, what that piece is.
I guess, is it reasonable to say that if you can figure out retention, perhaps your next step is engagement, which will come back to promote retention?
100%. Good people find good people. Good people know good people. And when I say good, meaning they stay, they're happy, they're in the role that they want to be in and in the company that they want to be in. That ends up kind of the circle of life of once you have that, they're going to refer other people if that's the direction you were going in, and or there's an old saying, high tide lifts all boats.
Right.
One person is going to lift others up. And and show differences in terms of why they continue with a company and continue with that community. So when you find good candidates and you find good and you make them good employees, or you see that they're good employees, if you can duplicate that and triplicate that, it makes talent acquisition much easier. So
Is there a big difference between the on-site person versus the remote
yeah,
employee?
there is, in a couple of different ways. Some people don't do well. I mean, there's kind of three areas now. There's a work from home, there's a hybrid, and there's a strictly on site. And some people are just not motivated by being at home. Um, Not only can some people not be motivated to be at home, some people can't find their center at home as a dedicated. This I am in my zone of working. They'll do other things, and it makes them stray a bit. And you have to, as a candidate, you have to be able to know that, right? As a job seeker, you have to be able to know that. We ask questions related to that, and we evaluate based on that. If we're working on specifically a work from home position, we look at everything in that. We work through cameras, make sure that works. All of those little things. The hybrid role is somewhat, they can do that. They can do a work from home, but they really much more like to be engaged at an office. They like to be able to water cooler talk is what we used to call it. I don't know if they do
Right,
anymore, but
right.
kind of same theory, right? They like the engagement around them. And then there's some people that just appreciate, I'm going to drive to work. I'm going to walk in the door. I'm going to have my community around me all the time, and then, drive home. You have to, again, inquire and understand what works for each one, because if you try and put a square peg into a round hole, that's not going to work. So if you try and put a person that does not work well, has never worked from home, we like to find experience that has worked from home in the past, because if you haven't experienced it, then you may not be as disciplined as you need to be for the position that you ultimately have to do. Just because you're home doesn't mean that you're doing things at home, like washing clothes or dishes or whatever, right? Like
Right.
there's a job that needs to be handled there. Um, and so making sure that you're not putting the wrong person in the right area. We ask questions about that. Vice versa, we were COVID brought us into a very open state of the availability to do that, and people got very accustomed to that, and they adjusted their lives to that. And so some people that are work from home and very good at that don't own cars anymore. Like they just, they
Oh, that's
travel
true.
other ways. And so they've adjusted their lifestyle to that. So again, if you try and force it the other way, it can become a bigger challenge than you need it to be. Um, so it's best to just find the right slot, and then, you know, if it's something that is good and a good fit, then great, and don't try and force it the other way, because that's not going to work ultimately long term.
So a new layer of complexity has been created for the talent seekers. That's
Yeah.
just what you needed on top of everything
We
else, right?
we like the challenge. We do like the challenge. It's a kind of a seeking and investigative detective kind of mentality that you have to have, I think, in talent acquisition. And I think a lot of it has to do with, are you we always like to hear the feedback, right, from operations after, because sometimes talent acquisition becomes a little bit removed from the people that have been hired for a while. But like, I'm in center today, and I saw people that we hired, and I got to see them and how they're doing. And we like talent acquisition likes the feedback, and so we like the challenge, but we also like to see people that stay, and you feel a little like you've impacted a life. I tell my team all the time, it's a noble job that we have. We have a very noble job. It gives empowerment to people in ways we probably don't even know. It feels really good. My favorite thing to do is make an offer to a candidate. It is still, after all these years, still my favorite thing. And so I have a whole team that does it really well, and they enjoy that piece too.
Okay, good deal. Well, I'd said at the outset that I was going to try to not intrude too much on your time, and I think I'm getting on the outskirts of doing that. Is there a point that that I haven't gotten to, something that I should be asking that bears mentioning?
I think that the one thing that talent acquisition always has to be aware of is the tools, the technologies, the approaches, the environment that is ever changing for us. And if we stick in one area where this is our traditional way of doing things, then you're going to lose on that war for talent. You just are. You got to move, and you got to be able to incorporate things that are helpful to get you to that decision faster. It doesn't mean you shortcut, but it definitely gets you there faster. And there's all kinds of things that even we're looking at and creating in our own environment, some really cool tools that quickly get us to that decision point. But you can't remove the people piece of it. You just can't. People like to feel reassured. People like to feel that they're part of that community and that you're expressing that community and representing that company in the very best light for them to make a decision to, because it's a two-way street. And that's what I would add.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, then, Ann. I appreciate your expertise and insight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll have to do this again. To Dan Smith, Director of Talent Acquisition at GlowTouch. Thanks to those of you who joined us today. We'll see you on the next installment of the GlowTouch podcast series.